So today I want to talk about employees of Frito Lays in Topeka, Kansas going on strike. The workers began their strike on Monday due to a combination of extreme hours, low pay, terrible working conditions, and poor treatment. Some of this is, of course, due to the pandemic, but as with most things involving the pandemic has only exacerbated problems that already existed. And a large part of this really does come down to a combination of corporate greed, mismanagement by the company, and the normalization of the mistreatment of workers. I want to start off, though, by taking a look at a video that features the perspective of the workers on strike, so we can get their positions directly, in their own words, at the picket line, and then explore more from there. So the video is brought to us by an organization, More Perfect Union. With that said, let's take a look at this video.
This is a strike for our lives. We get no days off, 12-hour days, no time with our families, and we get no good pay. We haven't had a raise in years.
So everything there already is more than enough reason to start a strike. They haven't gotten a pay raise in literally years, working 12-hour shifts with forced overtime. And mandatory overtime is one of those things where if you say no, you can potentially lose your job for something that you weren't even regulated to have to work in the first place. If you have a set shift and set hours, them asking you to stay is a favor that you're doing for the company. The fact that they should be able to say, oh, well, you have to come in is a ridiculous position. And all of these things start to add up and start to create the conditions where a strike really is necessary. And especially when people just want to spend time with their family. It's ridiculous.
You have people in this building that's been here for over 25 years, and I've been here for 37, and they are still forcing those people and myself 12 hours a day, 7 days a week.
They were working for home.
On top of that all, and not that this would be any better for people who are just joining the company, but if you've given 25, or in that guy's case, 37 years of your life to a company, the least they can do is treat you a little bit well. They've been exploiting you for that long, and you've already given so much to the company. Again, the least they could do. And to make somebody who's gotten up in years 12-hour shifts, to make them work that time, that is a complete disrespect and disregard for human life. And again, I completely understand why they are on this strike. In addition to all of the reasons that should be apparent about the exploitation of capitalism and our current system, this case in particular is absolutely atrocious. And it's probably going to become far more normal, as we'll see as we go over all of this.
Half of HR couldn't be seen for most of the weeks. But we had to be there 12 hours a week, 7 days a week. It's unfair to these people that got kids, that got families that live out here.
Yeah, people got to take care of their kids too.
It used to be a luxury to work here, but anymore, when you tell people that you work at this place, they just call you a slave.
We toured this in 5th grade even. They said, hey, you'll be happy to work here someday. Of course, that was before all the horrible working conditions and the lack of pay.
They just set people up as kids to start working in these factories.
You leave at 7 p.m. and they want you back in here at 3 o'clock in the morning. That's not fair. We need time with our families. We need time with our children.
People that work 7 days a week, 12-hour shifts, sometimes they have to pull suicide, which is you're off at 11 a.m., but you have to come back at 7 p.m.
So just to explain what that shift really comes down to, that suicide shift that they're referring to, that's referring to when you only get an 8-hour break between your two shifts. What often happens is one shift, they ask you to do 4 hours of extra overtime. So you work a 12-hour block. Then you're given 8 hours off, followed by coming in 4 hours earlier than what the other shift that you would be expected to come into, meaning that you now have another 12-hour shift. So What's supposed to happen is you're supposed to have at least 16 hours off in between. But because of the way they're doing that, you end up with 8 hours off, which is just enough time for you to go home, catch maybe a few hours of sleep, and maybe cram a meal down your throat if you're lucky enough to be able to do that. And that is dangerous for your health because, again, you need to factor in the time it takes to get home, the time it takes to get back to the place of work, the business, the factory. Then you have to take into account the time that it would take to eat a meal, assuming that you were able to, of course, just obtain one or buy one or have someone who lives with you make it. And then you have to go right to sleep to get up in a specific amount of time to go through your whole day again. And that's, of course, why they're calling it a suicide shift, because it's so detrimental to people's health. It is actually physically dangerous, the amount of stress that you can put yourself under. And sometimes you might not even be able to get sleep during that time, especially if you have to take care of your kids or you have to do other things, which means essentially you might be up for somewhere between 24 and 36 hours without any real amount of sleep. And that has to take a toll when it's happening day in and day out and people are working 72 hours plus in a week. That is atrocious conditions, and I see perfectly why they are striking. In a world where the 8-hour day was already fought for and is probably too much, this completely reeks of abuse of workers.
When we had the ice storm, we were in here, day in, day out. And all we got was some little lamps filled with kerosene to warm us up, and that didn't do anything in the warehouse.
One person already had heat exhaustion, like within a day, like of the higher temperatures hitting. And this was at night. Couldn't leave the line. No one came for breaks. No one helped them out. Management said you got to keep this line going and get it back up. They ended up wheeling them out that day.
Of course they did. You know, they have to work in extremely cold temperatures. They had kerosene lamps. That's not enough to heat things. And during the summer months when it gets really hot like that, to have people who are literally worried about dying or getting sick from exhaustion and somebody getting wheeled out and being like, no, we have to keep the line moving. You know, it doesn't really matter if people are sick. Keep it moving. Keep it moving. That's all they care about. And it just becomes apparent after a certain amount of time that companies like this do not care for their employees whatsoever. And this is quite a common thread within most companies in the way they operate. Even the companies that give packages in one day and age and are pretty decent in one time, they're going to move in this direction. It's the kind of like the natural place for a lot of these companies to end up, and it's certainly an issue of capitalism.
Gone 6 full years with nothing. Actually 7 because this is drug out a year. And then they offered us, for this new contract, they offered us a dime the first year, nothing the second year, and a dime the third year. So that would mean we would be going 9 years with 20 cents. You know, everything goes up, you know, milk, gas, everything. Our wages aren't going up. We can't survive like this.
They agreed.
Yeah, well, when you consider that, that is an absolute slap in the face. To get 20 cents over 3 years of working for a company of higher wages, that's nothing. That's not even matching inflation. And that middle year of getting no wage increase, just, I don't know, that bothers me even more so. I mean, the 20 cents is low enough, but then to have like a year where you get 10-cent increase and then followed by nothing, followed by a year where you get another 10-cent increase, just feels, I don't know, like you couldn't have just made it 10 cents each year. Like there's just so much pettiness going on that regard to try to hoard every little cent out of people. And outside of that, when you look at the way prices have been going up, between a combination of inflation over years, which again, their wages are technically lower than they were years ago, given that this has not been adjusted for inflation at all. And you take those increasing costs of basic products and necessities that people need, people are struggling, people are suffering. Add to that the pandemic and everything else, and add to that the major factor that a lot of things are becoming in much shorter supply these days, given a lot of the issues that are going on with the economy, which is driving up a lot of prices. And you're creating the conditions where, of course, people are striking. They need money. They need to be able to pay for their necessities. They need to be able to pay for their kids. They can't keep doing this. And at the end of the day, this is going to become more common as we see this combination of mistreatment of workers and the lack of pay and everything else. It's becoming so much more common to see people leaving their jobs, quitting their jobs, going on strike, because people are done with this. And they really are greedy, as this person is going to tell us about.
The CEO is making millions, yet
Yep.
we are making nothing, getting cents in raises. This is not fair.
No,
This
it's
is
not.
something that we wanted to
I can't
do.
even add
This
to
is
that.
something that we had to do. Nobody wants to go on strike. Nobody wants to sit out here making a spectacle of ourselves. But we will if we have to. If we want fair wages, if we want to be respected when we walk in the building, if we want the training site of Topeka to be a little bit better, we'll do this as long as we have to.
So yeah, this is the conditions that they've basically been left with. And to add on to all of that, Labor Notes put out an article talking about the 84-hour work week that some people have been having to deal with. So I want to continue our story there. As we know, some workers have been working these 12-hour shifts 7 days a week for weeks on end due to, quote, short staffing. Now, I need to address the term short staffing. Short staffing is not the issue here. The fact is, these companies could very easily get people to work for them if they actually paid a decent wage. This is, again, a low wage issue, and it continues to be a low wage issue where companies are not willing to compensate people adequately for the jobs that they're doing. Now, honestly, I'd love to see a situation where these workers ended up either taking over the factory themselves and maybe look into some cooperative opportunities. But given the world and reality that we live in, this is a absolute slap in the face to keep calling this a staffing issue. The fact that the company can't maintain enough employees means that they're not paying enough into their employees. They are not giving enough to their current employees, let alone future employees that might come into the company. This is not a short staff issue. This is a wage issue, a low wage issue, and it needs to be addressed, and we need to keep emphasizing that every single time that comes up. Now, the short staff issue that does exist is that's part of the reason why this company is having the mandatory overtime, because people don't want to work for the low wages, right? So in that sense, I guess you could say that it is a short staffing issue, but not for the reasons that they're normally saying. And people, of course, want to be able to go home to their families. One person said that he's only gotten a 77-cent increase over the last 12 years. And again, that's not going to help pay for inflation, but I just wanted to add another person's story to all of this. Conditions are deteriorating as contracts roll by, said someone else at the company. But when the contract came in, the workers voted down the latest contract offer from the company, which included a 2% wage increase this year and a 60-hour-a-week cap on the amount of hours a worker can be forced to work. The wages weren't enough, and the overtime cap would have meant that more senior workers would have been forced in on weekends, the workers said. So a lot of the people who are seniors would then be forced to take on the extra shifts. Not that they're going to hire more people, they're just going to do this. And it doesn't even make sense financially, because at the end of the day, they're going to have to pay these employees more money for the mandatory overtime, and they're just exhausting out their employees to begin with. But what that says is that they can't actually maintain employees who aren't desperate enough to be there. And that needs to be kept in mind as well. Management keeps going to the line, going after a worker, collapsed and died, and refusing bereavement leave for a worker whose father passed away during the COVID lockdown since there was no funeral. And see, this is the type of conditions that's just absolutely toxic. You had a worker collapse and literally die, and then they basically had to keep the line going. These are the type of conditions that these workers have been met with. And the refusal of bereavement for somebody just because there was no funeral. I mean, there could have been a Zoom funeral. There could have been some sort of time that the person needed to, I don't know, grieve or take some time for that loss that they experienced. But no, you're not going to an actual funeral, so why should you get time off? Grieve at work. That's where you live anyway with these 12-hour shifts. So you might as well do that. Now, the local 218 members voted in a 353 to 30 vote to approve the strike, considering all the conditions that we just outlined. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the company here. Frito-Lay is a division of PepsiCo. PepsiCo owns companies and brands like Mountain Dew, Quaker Oats, Gatorade, Tropicana, Aquafina, and many more. If you look at all the companies that PepsiCo controls, a lot of the things that we purchase and or buy come from PepsiCo. However, it needs to be noted that the division of Frito-Lay actually is responsible for over half of PepsiCo's operating profits, with profits of $5.3 billion on $18.2 billion in revenue, meaning they have enough money to pay their employees. They're just choosing not to. There are 850 workers there, but 600 are members of the local union. The issue comes down to the fact that Kansas is a right-to-work state, and what that really means, to boil it down, it's something that I should cover more in the future to break down how it came about and why it came about and how it benefits companies and not workers. But really, it's a position that allows people to be guaranteed a job with a company, even if they choose not to pay into or support the union. And so essentially you can have what is functionally scabs working on the company outside of the union while basically not paying into the union at all. And so that makes it a lot harder for unions to organize and to make sure that the workers are all following and supporting union protocols. And you can get people who work against the union on the inside, and that can make it really difficult. So that just adds to all of this. Now, with the pandemic, let's talk about that a little bit. The plant didn't slow down, and in fact, production increased. People who were at home wanted more comfort food like chips, so they tended to buy more products. Somebody who worked at the plant and retired in 2017 after 37 years of service ended up stating that I've learned that when something's hitting Americans beneath the belt, the two main items that never suffer are snack foods and alcohol. Workers were at one point given actually $20 per day in pandemic assistance, up to $100 a week, but that only lasted for a few weeks. One employee speculates that they were not sure if the company was afraid of them getting used to the higher wages. Well, if you could keep paying us that money, then why can't you just keep paying us that money? And that's really a good reason, right? If they were able to do it then, there's no reason they can't really do it now, especially with increased sales during the pandemic. The production of the plant fluctuates seasonally. It's busier during summer months and around big holidays, like the Super Bowl, which is a major holiday in the United States. Workers are used to overtime during those periods, but recently the overtime has become constant. Now we're having overtime when we shouldn't be. So we're not even seeing an issue where it's like, oh, well, sometimes they need us for extra hours, so we're willing to do that and blah, blah, blah. That it's really an issue that it's become consistent. It is nonstop. People have been quite normal with having to take on extra hours, and some of them might have even enjoyed a little bit of the extra pay. But to have it consistently 72 and 84-hour weeks, that is something that should not be happening at all. So one person said that they worked 73 hours during the week leading up to July 4th, and then worked from 3 a.m. until 3 p.m. on the holiday. Went to sleep and didn't even hear fireworks because they were so tired. One of the most hated forms of forced overtime at the plant is the suicide shift that we talked about, where they have where all the things that I explained occur, where people only have 8 hours off. These shifts have become increasingly common, especially in departments with the worst understaffing, like the warehouse. And this has become, of course, a new normal. Now, in response to the strikes, the company has done a couple of things. One thing that isn't listed here that I am aware of is that they completely cut off the workers' health insurance. And the company has set up a parking lot a mile from the plant where it's running coach buses from the lot every 15 minutes to shuttle in temporary workers and out-of-state scabs. But strikers suspect that the buses are actually a fake and are part of a psychological warfare to kind of demoralize and dispirit the people involved in the union, so that they'll come groveling back for basic crumbs. Local supporters, however, have been donating food and water to the picket line, and some local restaurants have said that they will stop using Pepsi products at their restaurants. A local magazine has actually set up a fund to help strikers pay their water bills. And it's really great to see that solidarity coming out. If you're on a picket line, one of the greatest things that you can see is your community coming out in support of what you're trying to do. It at least validates you and helps with the psychological factors of morale and keeping yourself out there. And the financial loss that you're taking of not having to have the money to necessarily pay all your bills. Part of the reason you're fighting out there is to get more money so you can actually pay for things. So taking a cut off of those days that you're missing can only exacerbate problems. And the company is counting on that, which is why solidarity in that formulation, mutual aid like that, is absolutely key. Now, there was an article put out where an employee of Frito-Lay actually laid out some more things, and I just want to take the time to look at the ones that haven't already been mentioned. They made workers work in dense smoke and fumes during and after a fire because they stated, quote, "It's just smoke." They had to work in the entire COVID-19 quarantine while office personnel worked from home. They didn't get hazard pay, bonuses, rewards, or recognition. And I know that was slightly mentioned before, but I wanted to emphasize that one again because the people who got to stay home were the people who were office personnel, the people in HR, and all of the higher execs. It was not the people who had to work on the plant. And of course, given everything, there was more interest in profit, so they had to keep the line running and just keep it going, even if people got sick. And I don't know the numbers on how many people on the plant got sick or if anybody got sick at all, but given that a lot of this is kind of on the hush-hush and people are not really talking about it, tells me that there's a lot more going on behind the scenes and people probably did get sick. In a lot of these places, people got sick in these factories, and it's something that kept the production line going, and it just is another representative issue of how we could not handle a pandemic in a way that kept people safe. It is an issue with the system and an exacerbation of a problem that already exists. They had to work through the deep freeze, which we mentioned. But the part that gets me is that an upper manager actually received recognition award for, quote, his dedication to come in on his weekend to keep our plant running. Meanwhile, the workers got nothing. That has to feel like a complete, again, slap in the face. And that's why you keep getting workers not wanting to work for companies like this, because they're treated absolutely like crap. Now, on top of that, the warehouses with carts of cardboard and product were blocking walkways, exits, and work areas, which is, of course, a fire hazard. And when you tell the company that it's not safe, they shrug their shoulders and say, it's push week. Basically, deal with it. Now, that is completely unsafe. Having boxes blocking exits especially, but as well as walkways and work areas, means that you're providing an unsafe environment for your employees and dangerous conditions that can lead to people dying. If a fire breaks out, then you literally have a fire hazard on your hands, as those boxes will catch fire and the fire will block the entrance ways, or exit ways in this case. That will, of course, lead to people dying. But who cares if a bunch of workers die? They'll have the insurance money. And that's what they really care about. Gotta keep the line going. Who cares about the workers? Now, how you bring in inexperienced temporary drivers leading to injuries, One of them major and numerous accidents, including a hit of a major structure beam, bending it and damaging the forklift. So you're bringing in people without experience because you want to pay them less. Great. The fact that you offer paternity leave to all employees except those at union plants. Ooh, that seems kind of like a problem. You're only giving these benefits to people outside of the union because you're specifically targeting union members. That sounds great. Your negotiator told us that it isn't Frito-Lay can't afford to give us raises. It's that there is a desire to protect the stockholder investments. And that's what it really comes down to. They can afford it. They made record-breaking profits. I talked about it already. But we have to protect the stockholder investments. Why would we be worried about the workers who actually have to, produce everything, having a decent living? Yeah, that's not a good look. Meanwhile, they held down wages for more than a year by refusing to give cost of living rates. One classification got a total of 20 cents in a decade of wage increases. And again, this is the issue. They didn't even increase the standards going with inflation, which means their wages now are again lower than what they were before. And the worst of it being, you have no problem paying for the drug tests, background checks, orientation, and training for 350 plus employees that you hired and lost this past year. You fly in temporary workers paying for hotel rooms, car rentals, wages, food, and more. Training for people who have no investment here. But you have a problem giving decent wages to keep loyal employees, already trained, already here, some of which are working for like 37 years. You were a fool to not do more to keep your employees from walking out that door, because many are never coming back, not with a job market so rich right now. And that's the thing, right? A lot of places are not able to hire and keep people at the low wages that they want to. A lot of people are just moving on to other jobs. And the truth of the matter is, they had 350 employees come in, and from what I understand, 350 employees went right out the door. They're subjecting people to drug tests, background checks, and they have to train people. All of those additional costs, plus the ability to temporarily bus or fly people in to get scabs potentially to work for them. That army of buses they have out there, they can easily pay for all that, but they can't pay their employees a proper living wage. And that's what these companies will do. They would much rather take all these side steps than actually pay people a living wage. And that is complete mismanagement of company resources, including the fact that all the overtime is technically more expensive. If they would just pay people a living wage, they'd probably find it easier in the long run to keep their workers and not have to keep funneling more money into people. It's actually bad for the company as well in a lot of ways. And it's again, mismanagement and mistreatment of employees. Now, one thing I do want to note is that these signs have been popping up everywhere. Due to labor issues at the Topeka Frito Lay Plant, we are out of some Frito-Lay product. We apologize for the inconvenience. And it's not just Frito-Lay you're seeing this. There's a lot of restaurants that have signs that say everybody quit, the restaurant's closed. And this is going to become again more common. A lot of places are not able to keep up with the fact that employees are not taking these low wages anymore. People can't afford to live off of them, and they're looking elsewhere. And with a lot of people wanting to be at home or wanting to find other ways to live their lives because of the pandemic, not wanting to put themselves at risk in quite the same way that these companies were willing to just throw their lives to the wayside, whether it be through the potential of a fire hazard, whether it be from the pandemic, or whether it be just keeping the line moving or the suicide shifts, people are sick and tired of it. And this is going to keep happening, not just in this one factory, but in many, many more. Now, it's a positive sign, again, that the local community is coming out in favor of these striking workers with signs like the one you just saw. I honestly believe that this is going to end up being far more common, like I said, that a lot of different places of employment are going to have to learn to at least treat their workers with some respect and dignity, and not just consider them replaceable and consider them people who can just be treated in these poor ways. And again, all the things I outlined and more are the type of things that these companies will continue to do to exploit the workers by overworking them, underpaying them, treating them poorly, And this is the outcome you get every single time. People are not going to stand by and take it. And I hope more workers continue to see the injustice and find alternatives for this abuse, whether that be finding a new company, getting the funds together and pooling it to start their own cooperative structures, or, at least in this case, to find solidarity on strike and to work with their unions in order to get more money for their jobs and better working conditions and every other demand that they want. I think in this case, we should all offer solidarity for the workers at this Frito Lays plant, and we should all hope for the best outcomes in their struggle and try to do whatever we can to support them, whether that be striking against the products and boycotting the products that Frito Lay puts out, or if you can directly fund them in some way, shape, or form. I don't have any sort of direct links, but I'm pretty sure you could find it if you Google it and or look for it, or maybe contact the union yourself. So with that said, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button and bell for notifications. You can follow me on Twitter and check out my Discord in the description down below. My name is Anarchist Tara. Let's continue to support these unions and workers, and I hope you have a great day.